Welcome everyone to the webinar on Let's Talk Menopause, and this is hosted by Nicky Piper, our Chief Nursing Officer. Just to let you know that the session will be recorded today, and if you have any questions then please use the Q&A box below, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. Over to you, Nicky.
Thanks very much, Alice. First slide's all about me, which always feels a bit awkward, but just a little bit of a synopsis from there is I've been qualified as a nurse for a number of years. Clearly, I've had my hair cut since that photo, which wasn't taken that long ago. I've worked as an A&E sister, and I've also always had an interest in family planning, reproductive health, and been very interested in that particular area. Trained as a specialist practitioner in occupational health back in 1999, and I've worked in a number of different types of occupational health settings. But the bit I like about occupational health is things like this, where you can actually provide people with some information to take away and kind of make some good health choices or lifestyle choices. And that's for me what occupational health is all about. Thanks, Alice. So what I intend to try and cover today is what is the menopause and who does it affect? What are the common symptoms? Some quite scary statistics actually, and how the menopause impacts on a person at work and how work could impact on a person. What can employees do to better support employees going through the menopause? And what can individuals do to help improve symptoms, or to at least make some choices about what they might want to do to help them through this, what is a natural but sometimes very difficult part of life. And then I'm just going to touch on the menopause and the Equality Act. And then, as Alice said, there's some space where we'll endeavour to try and answer some of the questions that you want to pose. I'm no 100% expert, so if I can't find the answers, I'm sure we can come back to you with some of those at a later date. Thanks, Alice. So just a little bit about what is the menopause. So there's two stages to the menopause. There's the perimenopause, which is when bodies are starting to change, they're getting a reduction in hormones, the ovaries aren't kind of producing as they should be, and people start to experience various symptoms at various degrees and levels. And the menopause itself is the definition of is when the menstrual cycle stops, and that's because the hormones are lowering during the perimenopausal levels, perimenopausal time, and the hormones start to reduce to a point where they then stop. The true definition is that the person has entered the menopause once they have been 12 months without a menstrual cycle. Thanks, Alice. So, who does the menopause affect? And I think this is quite underestimated sometimes. Obviously, the individual experiencing the perimenopause and the menopause often fit in the age group of 45 to 60, but there is quite a bit of flexibility with that. And they say that it lasts between 4 and 8 years. But I personally remember my nan, aged 80, saying to me, I still get those darn hot flushes. So I think that's a kind of generalist statement, but I do think it does go on beyond that point. Some people can start their kind of menopausal symptoms if they've had surgery. For example, if you've had a hysterectomy and had the ovaries removed, then that will induce the menopause much quicker. Also, if you've had some treatment for cancers, some of the chemotherapy drugs also change the kind of way in which ovaries function and reduce that hormone level and can trigger an early menopause. There's also people that have a genetic reasons why they start the menopause early. A good guide is often to look at when a parent started their menopause, and that's usually an indication of when you would start your menopause, give or take a year or two, but it's quite a good guide to use. Clearly, it can also affect transgender and non-binary individuals, and the different individuals with difference in sex developments. I think the bigger part as well is it impacts on everyone within that person's life and family, because obviously some of the symptoms can sometimes be extremely severe and quite unpleasant. So family, partners, carers, friends and colleagues can sometimes also feel the impact of the menopause. There's also a wider impact on the workplace and the economy, which I'll kind of come to a little bit later on in the slides. Thanks, Alice. So a few general considerations here. So perimenopause, menopause affects each individual very differently. I have a couple of friends who are both in that same kind of part of their life, and one of them has had very few symptoms. The other has had some very severe symptoms, and actually quite distressing symptoms too. So it is an individual journey, and everyone should kind of just accept and acknowledge that everyone will have a different experience. It can cause both physical and psychological symptoms, which again in itself can be quite kind of upsetting and distressing. As I said, the symptoms can be very mild or very severe, but one of the things that's quite kind of that says quite a lot is up to a third of the populace will have severe symptoms that impact on their quality of life, which is quite huge, really. Again, the symptoms can come for a little while, disappear for a little while. The intensity can be light, and then occasionally the intensity can be quite heavy. So it is very much, as I said, an individual journey. A lot of people don't realise that they're actually entering the perimenopausal stages or the menopause stages, and often get misdiagnosed because they have these odd random symptoms that nobody can actually put a finger on as to what might be the causation. And they often get misdiagnosed or treated for something that it really isn't. And they struggle to get the right level of support or treatment opportunities. Half of those affected actually don't even seek medical support because they don't really know what they're seeking medical support for. So again, it is very confusing. It's a very confusing period in life, really. Thanks, Alice. So I've listed here some of the symptoms, but as I said, they can vary for different people. This is not an exhaustive list, but I was just going to pick on a few that have quite severe impacts often, and are often the common ones that do crop up and have an impact on a person's ability at work. So hot flushes is clearly the most common that people report, where they kind of wake up in the middle of the night, the bed sheets are absolutely saturated, they have to get up, change the bed, get some fresh sheets, and then the same thing might happen later on in the night. Hot flushes also occur during the day and can be quite embarrassing because the way people describe those are that the heat transfers up their body from their feet right up to the top of their head. They actually sweat, so you can actually see beads of sweat on and around the face. And if you're in the middle of a presentation or in the middle of talking to somebody, that can also be quite impacting and quite embarrassing if the person you're talking to hasn't got an idea of what's going on here. Some of the other kind of symptoms are like low-level anxiety, panic attacks in people that are normally very confident, know what they're talking about, know what they're doing, and that kind of knocks on someone's confidence levels. Brain fog, memory lapses, difficulties in concentration. If you're in a job where, you know, being accurate, getting everything correct and right within your job, and then you start getting brain fog, memory lapses, or even trying to string a sentence together sometimes where you know exactly what words you want to say, but actually you can't get those words out. You can almost see them ahead of you, but you can't manage to say them. So that again impacts on a person's confidence and impacts on their want to actually carry out those elements of their job that normally they would do without any kind of hesitation. Sleep deprivation, again, a massive thing. We all know what it's like if we don't get our 6 to 8 hours sleep per night. The impact of that can be massive and affects our ability to coordinate, think, talk, everything. So, you know, they're kind of some of the real key ones that have a huge impact, which again will influence a person's decision making, which again I will come on to shortly. Reductions in libido, as well as some of the physical things like osteoporosis, but we'll be talking about how they can be avoided later. So all of these things, all of these symptoms on the screen can also be interrelated with a lot of other things. And I think this is where misdiagnosis occurs, or people start to think that they're actually going slightly mad or losing the plot because they're getting odd random things that they've never experienced before. Thanks, Alice. Okay, some quite shocking statistics, really. So 14 million working days are lost per year due to the effects of the menopause. That's huge. The sad bit is about 47% of those lie about the reason for absence because they're embarrassed due to some of the symptoms that they're experiencing. And 1 in 4 may even consider leaving work because of the severity of some of those symptoms that we just talked about and the impact that that has on their ability to deliver their job, in which normally they are in an exceptional position, but they really struggle and feel quite embarrassed, afraid, and awkward about addressing the symptoms that they're experiencing. 1 in 4, that's a quarter. Thanks, Alice. As I was saying, how it impacts upon work is huge. So according to the Office of National Statistics, this was in 2021, there were just over 4.4 million employed women in the UK aged 45 to 60, which is the core time frame for perimenopausal and menopausal people. We could only find statistics that referred directly to women, but it's important to understand there's not as many studies or very little studies in regards to any of the other LGBTQ definitions. So apologies that it just refers to women, but these are from the national statistics. 45% of women feel that their menopausal symptoms have had a negative impact on them at work. And as I said, those hot flushes, the brain fog, the blocking, all contribute to how that might make them feel. Psychological symptoms, along with fatigue, poor sleep, also kind of lack of support sometimes in the workplace, can all impact upon their performance, accuracy in decision making, working relationships. As I said, it impacts on everybody, let alone the individual that's experiencing all those symptoms, and it can knock on their reduction in self-esteem and loss of confidence. As I said, physically, the hot flushes, sweating, and along with that sometimes can come at urinary incontinence. And again, that can be really embarrassing and cause discomfort and make people feel very uncomfortable in the workplace. Thanks, Alice. So, as I was saying, just to kind of recap, really, many people find it particularly difficult to manage those symptoms in the workplace, and especially where they don't feel they can be open and transparent about it, or struggle to talk to people to explain what's going on for them. Although things have changed quite substantially in regards to talking about the menopause, there is still a bit of a taboo around the subject. I think we're breaking through that a little bit. And I think, you know, programs that Davina McCall did around busting the myths about menopause and starting to make it a topic that should be discussed openly and understood openly, so that people can understand how others are feeling or other symptoms that people are experiencing that are difficult to talk about and awkward. So, you know, we need to continue to work and make it a subject that's comfortable to be talked about in the workplace, like any other illness that we might experience, but we can still kind of talk about it and explain how we're kind of being challenged at that point of time personally. Again, it tends to hit people around the peak of their career. So, you know, the ages of 40 to 60 are when people are in the prime of their career life. And so that kind of going from being a really successful, confident person to then struggling with delivering what's expected of you, and that dramatic change in some of those symptoms, if you've got those severe symptoms, can be really devastating and can have a massive effect, which is why that then contributes to people considering leaving their jobs and or asking for a lesser job than the one that they're working in at that point in time, which has a huge impact. You know, they've got a lot of experience, they've got a lot to offer, and that can actually have a drain on talent. And then within the workplace itself, you got that loss of knowledge, that loss of expertise, productivity, and it's a massive cost to companies. So it's well worth considering what it is that the companies can do to support people through this really challenging phase in life. Thanks, Alice. So we thought we'd look at what can employers do better to support employees going through the menopause. I think one thing that's really key here is when we're at school, we're taught about sex education, we're taught about what to expect, how our bodies change, you know, the start of our menstrual cycles, the start of puberty. You know, we're given a lot of information at school to prepare us for what comes. Unfortunately, the other end of life, when the body starts to change again, we're given very little in the way of education or preparation for this. So, you know, there's a huge gap there, because I think if we were educated and made aware of what might be happening, then it would help us to understand those subtleties and changes that we're perhaps experiencing as we approach that 40 to 60 point in our lives. Most of the symptoms can actually be effectively managed with the right advice and the right support and treatment. And employers can play a huge important role in increasing that awareness, so almost stepping in where the schools stepped in when we were younger, and being able to kind of make it a topic that can be talked about. Provide access to information, improve people's experience of menopause in the workplace. And I've got a few suggestions as to how this might be able to happen. Thanks, Alice. So education and awareness, I think really key to have talks like this for your workforce, for all genders, for everyone within the workplace. Because as we said at the very beginning, you know, the impact of the menopause is not just on the person, it's on everybody that they kind of live with, work with, come across. So really important people understand sometimes why people might be slightly behaving differently one day if they're really feeling challenged by the symptoms that they're experiencing. So talks like this are really good to just start to open up that topic of the menopause. Again, have an easy access to information and advice, signposting available for people to kind of pick up, be it you do a topic on your intranet sites, or you do a topic if you're in a workplace where you still use paper and advertise the awareness of Menopause Awareness Month, which is obviously October, which is why we're here today. And also think about, you know, referring people and getting them to get the right level of help that they may need. Some work environments have put in place a menopause policy. Others have actually popped the a section, if you like, within their attendance management policy to address some of the challenges that the menopause brings for people, and also suggest some support and advice or reasonable adjustments that they may wish to consider to support that person whilst they're going through those severe symptoms. As I said, the menopause is a personal journey, so it will vary from person to person. It's quite easy sometimes to kind of see one person who's breezing through it and then another person that's really struggling. But these are genuine experiences and should be acknowledged as that, because it's easy sometimes to think, well, they're not struggling like that, but really best to avoid those kind of thoughts and accept what's being presented before you. There's also some schools of thought about developing a support network within the workplace, so almost having a work-based champion for the menopause, so a designated group of people who can meet at their lunch breaks or after work or the latter part of the day, whatever would fit within the organisation's requirements, and just have a place where they can talk openly, feel reassured, feel supported in regards to their experiences, because sometimes it's quite difficult to talk about it, particularly if you're having anger moments or shortness of temper or poor tolerance to things. Being able to just talk about that in a safe space can actually be very beneficial to the individual that's experiencing those symptoms. But also hearing about other people's stories about how they've managed and what they've done is a really good way of helping people get through this time. Apply flexibility. So flexible working patterns are really useful, particularly where people are having those sleep deprivations, starting work a little bit later, or a changing contract to allow them to start a little bit later, or if you have a shift pattern, adjusting that so that the shift pattern works to give them that little extra sleep in the morning if they've been up 3 or 4 times in the night with the hot flushes, going to the loo, whatever that might look like. So really important to consider flexibility within the workplace as much as you can. Clearly, some organisations it's difficult, but then it's about trying to think outside of the box. This is for a period of time, bearing in mind things do get better, things do improve, but it's about just having a look at what you can do from a business perspective to try and apply that bit of apply that flexibility. Gosh, my teeth are falling out clearly. Consider any reasonable adjustments. As I said, it's not about necessarily reducing their hours down, but looking at what could be done within the workplace. And one thing that can be really helpful and supportive, particularly if people are having that brain fog, trouble speaking, that they put into place a bit of a peer support or a mentorship. So if, for example, you worked in finance and accuracy of numbers and everything is really key to your role, good just to have someone who can have a quick glance over it before it goes to its final destination, and that reassures the individual that they've not missed anything, and again helps reduce some of that anxiety, lack of confidence, but also makes them feel supported with those decisions. So kind of putting in place a mentor, peer support, or actually working very closely with their manager, carrying out a risk assessment, if you like, looking at the areas of their job that they're worried about or causes them concern, or the challenges that they're having in their role, have that one-to-one with the manager, pull together that risk assessment. It also opens that door to having conversations with each other from time to time, particularly where symptoms are bad, but also having an understanding that somebody who works very close with them also understands what's going on for them and can then kind of provide that additional support. Clearly, some people might want to speak to an independent person, so having the ability to use an EAP or access counselling through the NHS systems, which is a bit under pressure right now, but there are systems out there that people can access to have a bit of talking therapy just to help them with some of those psychological symptoms that they're going to be experiencing or maybe experiencing. Thanks, Alice. So then there's also what individuals can do to try and help themselves, because obviously the workplace can do stuff, they can do stuff. So, you know, if we all pull in the same directions, that should help individuals to improve their symptoms and hopefully help them manage them better too. So improving your diet, eating a well-balanced diet, not too much of the fatty foods, because obviously for some, weight gain is one key factor that the menopause has on them. So think about your diet, cutting back on alcohol, quitting smoking. All of these things play havoc with our bodies. So if we can try and reduce them, or at least address some of them, it's going to help with the symptoms that you could be experiencing. Help increasing your physical activity, really important. Oops, we've shot across, I think, here, Alice. Physical activity, no, back another one or two, I think. Thank you. Increasing your physical activity has a multitude of positives. You become more physically active, so you get fitter and healthier, but also by taking up, be it walking, as in power walking, or some kind of impact-based exercise, will help your bone density, because we start to lose bone density as we go through the menopause. And by increasing those types of exercise, it actually helps sustain your bone density. And bone density loss is just one of the symptoms that you can experience. So anything you can do to try and help improve and relieve any of the symptoms is also really positive. By looking at those slight changes to lifestyle, you can improve your sleep. Particularly the reduction in alcohol. Alcohol makes us sweat and doesn't allow us to have good sleep. If our sleep's already impacted with menopausal symptoms, it's almost like a double whammy. So that's why the cutting back on alcohol, caffeine, all of those stimulants will certainly help us to kind of reduce some of the symptoms. So we can improve sleep and reduce those hot flushes. And we can protect ourselves, as I said, against those longer term health issues associated with changes to hormone levels during and post and perimenopausal and postmenopausal. Thanks, Alice. So there are a few options here of treatment choices. So complementary therapies are one of the options. Anecdotal evidence that some complementary therapies may help to relieve some symptoms of menopause. So black cohosh, evening primrose oil, there's a multitude of them out there that have got brief studies. I think the difficulty with any of the complementary therapies is there's very little in the way of scientific evidence that these therapies are effective. And I think one of the other challenges is what sort of dose you need to actually manage those symptoms and effects. But for some people, they work really, really well. I have a friend who used black cohosh and her flushes stopped almost instantaneously. I have other friends that didn't find that black cohosh helped them. So again, it's all part of that individual's journey. So, you know, they're worth looking at, worth considering. Always, though, there's a chance that if you're on medication already, they may have an impact on that medication. So always worth having a check out with a GP or pharmacist, just to make sure that you minimize any risk or contraindications that might occur. But certainly are worth looking at and worth considering. I mean, it's also known that something called phytoestrogens that you can find in things like soya also help with the reduction, particularly in the hot sweat symptoms. Thanks, Alice. And then the other alternative, of course, is hormone replacement therapy. And I think there's been a lot of misinformation on hormone replacement therapy and the impact and side effects that come from it. And I think there's been a lot of research done, and there's been vast improvements in treatment options. I think previously all you could have really was a tablet, which again then carried the heavy side effects of potential cancers and all those kind of scary things. Now there's much broader opportunities with various hormone rubs, patches. There are still medications, so there's a multitude of different treatment opportunities, and you know, they do work very quickly. They also have some other benefits too, but there are side effects, like with any medication. You know, if you take a paracetamol, there's side effects of paracetamol. So always worth getting information, being informed, asking the right questions, reading lots of articles, reading lots of information. So at least when you're making decisions, if your symptoms are severe enough that you want to look at treatment options, that you go into that discussion with your GP with plenty of information, and prepared for what it is that you feel is happening for you. They can be very effective very quickly. Within a week or so, you can start to feel some changes in your symptoms. So very good. And sometimes the benefits tend to outweigh the risks. So again, it's about just getting that information. There are some real positives to HRT as well. You're actually replacing the hormones that your body's starting to run out of. So again, helps with all that bone density stuff, to reduce breakages later on in life. So if we lose bone density, it means we're going to be more prone to fractures if we fall over, injure ourselves. So by taking HRT, that will actually help maintain that bone density for that period of time. It's not for everyone, and shouldn't be considered appropriate for everyone. People need to have choices, but also they need to be informed and given that opportunity to talk through what options are available for them. Next one, please, Alice. So just touching on the Menopause and the Equality Act. The menopause itself is not covered by the Equality Act 2010. However, it can be closely related to several protected characteristics, and it could therefore be deemed discriminatory if an employee or worker is treated less favourably or put at a disadvantage because of their menopausal symptoms. There has been an increase in cases being taken to tribunal since 2018. There's not a lot of changes to the law, or there's not been any real big test cases that have successfully changed the decision about the Equality Act. But who knows, tribunals often do come up occasionally with some quite different outcomes than we expect. But to date, they haven't been successful, even though that says successfully in the slide there. Under the Health and Safety at Work Act, all employers have a duty of care to look after the health and well-being of their employees. So I guess this just kind of takes us back to the need to think about, consider what opportunities you have to support an individual that's going through usually the most severe elements of the menopausal symptoms. So watch this space, I guess, in regards to potential tribunals in the future, but this is the current status. Thanks, Alice. So we've got some kind of further information, food for thought for people to take away and have a look at. Certainly, I would recommend for anyone who didn't see the Davina McCall program to have a little look on it. You can do it on iPlayer, which is about the menopause, and it was a really good balanced opinion on differences, treatments, and ways in which individuals can look and perhaps help themselves with some stuff, but also increase their knowledge and awareness around it. And I think the final slide is the resources that we used to put this presentation together. And I think that's it. So if we've got any questions, I can probably try and answer a few of those.
Thank you, Nicky. Yes, we've had quite a few questions come in.
Okay.
I think you've covered some of these already, but you can repeat, I imagine, just to reconfirm. So one of the ones was, is menopause classed as a disability, which I think you've just covered?
Yeah, so in essence, it doesn't come under the Equality Act, but some of the symptoms, and because the symptoms can go on for a long time, it will start to kind of verge on the edge of potentially being, which is why we'd always recommend that reasonable adjustments are considered.
Thank you, Nicky. The next one is there a medical diagnostic test that can identify when someone is perimenopausal?
You can have a blood test. However, what should happen is people should be working on symptoms, because sometimes symptoms are the first thing that occur before the hormones drop to a level that would be a definite indication. So yes, you can have a blood test done which will measure your hormone levels, but it's only really a part of the picture. And what often happens is, if you pop to your GP, you have your blood test done and they say, well, actually your levels are okay, but you actually might be feeling the hot flushes, quite mood resistant, quite irritable, then that's often a key sign that you're probably perimenopausal. So it's about looking at that whole picture.
Thank you. Next question is, does being on the pill help with menopausal symptoms?
It certainly can control them, because what the pill does, it actually provides you with a level of hormone. So you kind of have a fake menstrual cycle when you're on the pill. So that can actually mask some of the symptoms. So if people are on the pill, be it the combined pill, that is, or even the progesterone only pill, they can actually have a cover of hormone whilst they're on it. So the minute they consider stopping, they may well get quite a onslaught of symptoms that they probably weren't expecting. So it's really important you phase how you come off those things, really, and consider obviously the other part of late pregnancy and all of those kind of things once you start taking that sort of contraception.
That's great. One of the questions is, do we have a risk assessment template that we can share?
I tend to recommend that people use the generic risk assessment or even the stress-based risk assessment, because all of which will start to look at what is impacting from a job perspective. So you can use the HSE one, or if you've got your own one, you can certainly utilize that. But the stress one is quite a good one to base it around. There isn't one specifically for menopausal.
Okay. Thank you. What reasonable adjustments can be made in relation to the menopause?
Okay, so I think we touched on a few. So people may need a little space, and I saw one question about sometimes it's about mood management. So being able to perhaps take that little bit of time out to kind of go and cool off, calm down in a quiet space is really good. Being able to kind of just give your manager the nod that you need to do that is really good. Having a fan on your desk for those hot moments is a really useful tool as well, as long as it's obviously been through PAP testing and all those safety things that we have to go through. Again, later starts in the morning if people have had a poor night's sleep, or actually earlier starts if that they find themselves feeling tired much later in the day. So it's really kind of just looking at having that conversation, looking at what's reasonable from a work perspective, and looking at what opportunities you have as a business to just make very small, subtle changes that will just allow that bit of comfort and understanding of the person's experience at that given time.
Thank you. Are there any legal requirements to support, similar to the disability laws, in terms of sickness?
Probably not that I'm aware of, because it doesn't come under the Equality Act per se. Then the reasonable adjustment is more about being a responsible employer, to be fair, and looking at reasonableness for everybody, like you would with any illness, whether it falls under the Equality Act or not. So I don't think there's a legislative that I'm aware of, but it is about being an employer of choice and being reasonable about what it is you can do to support that person.
Thank you. Okay, next one. Is it necessary to stop HRT before surgery? They have been advised to stop this 3 weeks before a surgery, and they're just wondering how soon will symptoms come back?
Okay, it depends upon what the surgery is. And I think the main reason they probably have suggested it is due to the potential for blood clotting. So during surgery, you're under anaesthetic and you don't move very much. So you're more prone to picking up things like blood clots. So 3 weeks, you may start to experience some of the symptoms again. So yeah, as soon as the surgery is over and you're up and running, then by all means get back into the patches that you're using, because that will certainly help get rid of those symptoms again for you. But it's done from a medical health perspective, I believe.
Thank you. So, can you suggest how you balance the peer mentorship support without making the employee feel incompetent or make their peers question their ability?
Okay, so I think this is done very sensitively, and hopefully as people become more aware of some of the symptoms of the menopause, they'll start to ask for that sort of help themselves. So, I mean, there are different ways you can address anything, really. You know, I've noticed that you're perhaps feeling a little bit edgy. Is there anything that I can do to help support that? So that can be kind of a broad opening of a question. Would it help if type options of offers? You know, they're the kind of real helpful opening gambits. But most people, if they're in a job where, you know, accuracy isn't 100%, or if you're picking up that there's a few changes to their normal level of performance, just having that sensitive conversation with them and say, look, is everything okay? You know, I've noticed a couple of things have crept in recently. Is there something that I, as your manager, can do? Would it help if I offered you some support by a colleague? You know, those kind of ways of approaching it in a sensitive way, or the individual may well ask for it.
Thank you. Okay, the next one. Will you get the same side effects indicators if you've had a total abdominal hysterectomy to know if you have started or ended the menopause?
Okay, with a total abdominal hysterectomy, it depends if they take out your ovaries as well as your uterus. So if they take out your ovaries, then game over. You will automatically go into the menopause part, because obviously you're not producing any hormones whatsoever. If you've got your hormones, if you've got your ovaries, even got hormones and ovaries all in my head now. If you've got your ovaries in situ, but have just had your uterus removed, then your ovaries will gradually die out naturally anyway. So you'll probably go through a perimenopausal stage and then into the menopause. But as I say, some people don't even know they've gone through it. They're not aware of anything, and they just know that their menstrual cycles have stopped, and they're not sure. They've assumed that they've gone through the menopause, and that's the end of that, really. Okay. So it's very different.
If a GP only spends 5 minutes with you to discuss choices, where can you get informed advice to help make the right choices?
Okay, so there's lots and lots of resources out there. We've got a page on the the slides, which is some resources for you. Also worth talking to other people who have been through or are going through the menopause, just to understand some of the things that they've experienced or not. Speak to parents, you know, get a broad base of information. You can also ask to see the GP in the practice who specialises in menopause, because each practice should have someone who specialises, or the practice nurse often may well be another point of contact. So you can ask, and you are entitled to get the best advice that you need. But it's about having a good general read, I would say. Speak to the GP, speak to other people, read the most recent articles. There'll always be good and bad about every treatment option, and it's about weighing up your symptoms and how it's impacting on your day-to-day life, and making those informed decisions.
Thank you. Next question. I'm on medication for seizures and have been told that I cannot have HRT. Is there anything else that they can put me on?
Okay. You may be able to try some of the alternatives that I talked about. So worth having that discussion with your GP or your pharmacist. Also, it's probably worth asking to be referred to a menopause specialist to see what other suggestions they may be able to offer in relation to, you know, what's not contraindicative to your medication.
Wonderful, thank you. I have heard that there will be changes to the employment law in 2023 that will involve the menopause. Is this true?
I've not seen it myself, but that doesn't mean to say it's not likely to happen. I'm sure it will be, if I think that, because it's an ongoing process, isn't it, about busting the myth and breaking down barriers. I wouldn't be surprised if they do start to introduce new legislation, but I haven't seen anything at this point, but that doesn't mean to say it's not out there.
Thank you. Could you say a bit more about the UK minority ethnic group experience? I understand in some countries that there are no words for some things like vagina, menopause, etc. And also people of colour have different experiences in relation to the menopause itself, and also their ability to access health support.
I can talk generically, I guess, around that. I think, again, it's a really sensitive area. I think I think everyone's very frightened of how to address and how to say different things, and certainly people need to think about the broad and wider populace for sure. I'm not sure if there are any alternatives. There's a lot of research at the moment going on around looking at better ways of communicating, particularly in the transgender communities and the you know, and all the kind of LGBT communities. I think there's a lot of work still to do. I think we've got a lot of work to get things right, and I agree, you know, it's around trying to find someone who you could confide in to help you kind of negotiate through you know, all those kind of differences and those hurdles that you talked about there. Sorry if that's not gone specific enough, but
okay, next question is, what is the best way for men to show their support? I really believe this should be open to discussion for all, and we should all show support. Do you feel people will appreciate support from their male colleagues, or do you feel it's something that others would find uncomfortable?
I think it depends how it's done, if I'm honest. I think if you're talking from a personal perspective, I think men should certainly understand some of the symptoms that the individuals are going through at any given time, and that should hopefully allow them to be a bit more empathetic or understanding. I think opening up webinars like this to all genders is a really good way of starting to break down some of those barriers. Yes, some people will feel embarrassed if the male of the species in the office you know, are knowledgeable and aware, but I think there is no right or wrong really, and I think it's about being sensitive about how you're delivering that information.
Thank you. So there's two questions in one now. So does being on the coil help with the menopausal symptoms? And if you have the Mirena coil, how would you know you were going through the menopause?
You probably wouldn't, because obviously the Mirena coil, for those who don't know, actually controls the hormone levels and releases hormone, a bit like the progesterone only pill. So you probably wouldn't have the awareness. Sometimes you do get breakthrough with the Mirena coil, but again, it's probably something that you won't necessarily 100% know what's going on, because it gives your body a bit of a false sense of security, really.
Okay. Does the NHS offer hormone tests to help you work out what dosage of progesterone and I'm losing my teeth, thank you, you should take?
Again, it's about trial and error with this, because you can, as I said at one of the other questions, I think you can do blood tests, but actually the blood tests are not really a true reference to what people are experiencing. So for me, it's about the symptoms. Yes, you can have a blood test. Usually they start on a very low dose, because with a lower dose you get less the risk, and if that has no impact, they'll then take the dose up after a given period of time. So it is a bit like a blood pressure tablet. If you want to do a comparison, they'll start you on one that might not suit you, so they might put you onto a different one. So it is a bit of a trial and error time.
Thank you. If you declare menopausal symptoms like foggy brain, fatigue, etc. during a selection process and an OH referral is carried out, has that ever been considered as a reason to decline the job to a candidate?
Most certainly it should not be, and I'm not aware of that being an issue. To be fair, a lot of people wouldn't even probably mention it as part of their kind of application anyway, because I think we experience all sorts of things, and when you're nervous anyway, you can have brain blocks, you can have brain freezes as a normal reaction to that nervous moment during an interview or a selection process. So I'm not aware that anyone has been declined due to that. I think, you know, if it is something that's impacting greatly, it's helpful to share that in a constructive way and, you know, kind of explain and just say, you know, please bear with me. I'm just trying to think through the question you've just asked me, or kind of buy yourself that bit of time as part of that process. But I'm not aware that has specifically been a reason before.
Okay. I have recently discovered that the NHS max level of HRT is not the same as in private medical. Does Nicky have any comments on this, and can or should employers offer support for financial aid towards this?
Okay, so I guess if you pay to see a private consultant, they're probably going to have a much wider portfolio of options for you because it's kind of in their best interest. I think with the NHS in the situation it is, I think they have a smaller portfolio of options available, and probably that's where it sits. I am aware that there has been some quite challenging times in relation to getting the different types of HRT patches, and I do know that there's been a bit of a shortage. So sometimes if you're in the private sector, you may well have that bigger advantage than you do in the NHS sector. I don't think that's right personally, but unfortunately it is kind of the way it is sometimes.
Okay. Do people stay on HRT indefinitely, or is there a certain age that needs to be stopped?
That's an interesting question. They recommend that you shouldn't be on it for more than 6 to 8 years. I have a friend who's in her late 60s, early 70s, and she's refusing to surrender her patch because she doesn't want to experience what might happen if she gives it up. Obviously, it's about what what's agreed with your kind of GP, but the normal time for the menopause is between, as I said at the beginning, up to 8 to 10 years. So that's usually the duration. But some people give up before. Some people stop halfway and think, I'll see how I feel, get all the symptoms back, so quickly put a patch on again. So it is very much something to have a discussion about with your GP as to what's best.
Okay. The next question is, the GP refused to start HRT until hot flushes were there in spite of providing symptoms like foggy brain, weight gain, low mood, etc. Is it important to have hot flushes to start HRT?
Not at all. Not everyone has hot flushes. So I think you need to challenge your GP on that and just say, look, I've read a lot, I've seen a lot, I've got 10 other symptoms that indicate that I'm probably menopausal and I want to try HRT. Sometimes you've just got to be really assertive and ask for what you want.
Okay.
I mean, personally, I never had a hot flush, but I had lots of other symptoms. So yeah, you can't just go on one symptom alone.
No, it's very individual to the person.
Very much.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that's all the questions for today. Thank you everyone for attending, and a recording of the webinar will be sent out to everyone that registered for the webinar in a couple of days. Okay. Thanks very much.
You.